What is up, world? So today we've got something special going on. It's the Talent Roadmap podcast meets the Parsity podcast. So Brian and I have been kind of communicating and following each other on LinkedIn for over a year now. We both have our own, setups, but, today we decided to join forces and kind of, bring the Avengers together and talk about the same things that we typically want to address in these conversations. So super unscripted. We literally came in with no plan. We're going to tell our stories, go from there. So without further ado, I'll pass to Brian, maybe give an introduction of your story, Brian, and then we'll just wing it from there, man, and take it.
Let's do it, man. Yeah, I think we're both subject matter experts in our own respective domains. We can probably pull this off. So I'm Brian. I am the owner of Parsity. I'm also a software engineer. Parsity is a mentorship coding program. I typically shy away from the term coding bootcamp just because I feel like they have so much baggage related to them nowadays. But it's really more of a mentorship program to teach people how to code, how to change careers. I got into software in my 30s, early 30s, after living very salacious kind of background story, not the greatest. Did a lot of bad things in my 20s, got my life together, learned how to code, got into software somehow, and I've been really loving it since and spent the last 10 years and currently still writing code for a living. Yeah. How about you?
Nice. Yeah. I was quick intro of myself. So Talent Roadmap is something I spun up almost 2 years ago after being laid off as a senior manager of recruiting at a tech company called Commure. I had a great time there. And kind of got into recruiting because out of necessity, right? I was actually a cable technician for AT&T, fresh out of audio engineering school in San Francisco. Prior to that, I was in the military for quite some time. So my pathway is kind of rough as well. Brian shares some similarities and the salacious upbringings in our 20s. Yeah. But fast forward to today, I realized after recruiting for almost a decade, I really love just meeting people, talking to people, and built some playbooks that led to coaching. Coaching led to the podcast, and I think this is kind of where I really spend most of my time and enjoy my time, because it is something that I think we all need, right? The conversations and the advice and the tips, whether they come from one source or many sources. I think this is kind of cool to do. So yeah, that's where I'm at now, and this would be, I think, I don't know, podcast 7 or 8. There was many failures before this got to this point, but that's what I've got going on, man.
I mean, it's a great subject because, as you know, like, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I speak to tons of people that are trying to get into Parsity. And also I speak to a lot of people that get out of coding boot camps or software engineers. I mean, I speak almost exclusively to software engineers or people that want to get in. And the number one question is, of course, how do I get hired? Mm-hmm. Right? Like, what do I got to do? How do I get hired? And I tell them kind of what I think. But at the same time, I know that, like, I'm not a recruiter. I've never been one. And a lot of times I feel like, I know it's worked for me. But at the same time, I know there's like kind of a black box on the other end of where you send your resume, and recruiters in general have been the way I've gotten to most of my jobs. When I think about all the jobs, the last 5 jobs I've got have all been directly through recruiters. I don't think I've really done like a cold apply and gotten anywhere. And I'm curious. I want to know a lot more about that side of the game. Like, just personally, like, how does that all work? Like, you're a recruiter. You've done that for a while. So I'm kind of hoping you can shed some light to me and our respective audiences on, like, how does this work? How does the game of hiring work, and why is it broken? Because it feels pretty broken right now in some ways.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. This is if you got 3 hours, I can tell you everything. So I come across the same issue even as a candidate when I was looking for work, right?
Yeah.
The overarching theme is you've got to network, right? You've got to do good work. You've got to meet friends. But how do you do that, right? And there's also, you've got to update your resume for every role you're applying to. How do you do that? You've got to reach out to hiring managers and coordinate how you do that. There's so many ways of doing it, and I don't think any which way is right or wrong. And I think there's a lot of luck involved, timing, market and macroeconomics, all of that, especially in tech, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So my answer is, it's still broken. I don't even necessarily know if it's going to be solved, because I'm actually doing side projects on how to maybe solve the interviewing portion, the resume portion. And I'm currently working with a seed stage startup right now, which I'll probably announce next month or so. And same issues on hiring, like, how do we get folks in? What questions do we ask? So it blew my mind, like, almost 10 years into this, and we're still having the same issues on the proper candidate experience. So I guess what it boils down to is if you're fresh out of a coding program or college, right? What you don't want to do is say, hey, can you look at my resume, right? That's a kind of a thing that over time will be just dismissed, especially with folks like myself who've been in it for a while. It's
Okay.
not that we don't want to. It's
Hmm.
like in our careers, we have all these other things going on outside of resume reviews and helping folks with their resume previews. Nowadays, when people ask me, I say, hey, I can do it for you, but I'm going to use ChatGPT and I'm going to show you how to do it on that, right? I think that's,
That's really smart. That's kind of a
yeah,
nice way to do it. Like teach
yeah,
a man how to fish, right? Type of
exactly.
thing.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. And I think if I can, there's one thing I think folks could get really good at is just having conversations because that'll prepare you to tell your story in an interview. And if the interview doesn't go well, you have a network connection. And this quick story here, someone by the name of Johannes, I interviewed at his company, Afresh. He was the chief of staff. This was 2020.
Okay.
I didn't make the cut, but I loved the experience so much. We stayed in touch. And 4 years later, I may be helping him get hired somewhere else. We've never met in real life, but just that
That's
one
cool.
conversation. Yeah. So
Hmm.
those all add up, right? I think the resume thing, I would outsource that to AI or someone that writes really well. Sam's
That's what I
drawn
tell
on.
people nowadays. I'm like, get a
Yeah.
professional because I'm like, I don't want to spend time doing this. I want to focus on the
Yeah.
technical portion of the interview, the stuff I'm actually going to get judged on, really.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then the communication style, the email follow-ups, the hey, it's been a few days. How should we approach this persuasion there? There's a sales tactic there as well.
Hmm.
And not to say you need to learn all of those things, but understand that the black box is not just the ATS because there are humans, looking at your resume. The black box is how many emails is a recruiter getting every day, which meetings they're in. Outside of interviews, we're meeting with hiring managers. We have our own team meetings. We have
Yeah.
meetings with additional stakeholders. We have meetings where we're training people how to, interview. And oftentimes recruiting, the function itself, runs lean, right? It's like, hey, it
Okay.
can't be that
Yeah.
hard.
Right.
You do this, this, and this. But if you look at recruiting from a platform perspective, there's the sourcing, there's the inbound, there's the agencies we work with. That has to be, productized and systemized and like
Hmm.
refined. Then there's the interviewing portion for the candidates. That has to be like top tier because if you don't do well, the word gets out. This is a crappy company. Don't interview with them. It becomes
Yeah.
extra hard, right? So there's
Oh
this
yeah, for
initial life
sure.
cycle. And from there, you have to be so careful from a company perspective on how you treat folks. Because if you get to the end stage and you're not selling the company as a solution to this individual's career, like, hey, I want to do this, this is my career. If I can do that here, it'd be fantastic.
Hmm.
I'd like to get paid certain band, that'd be the perfect fit. And if this person's in 4 or 5 different conversations, now we've spent 30 hours with this individual
Yep.
and cannot offer them what they want for their career because we all have, a trajectory. We don't necessarily want to be put into a mold. I think nowadays, with all these side gigs and Justin Welsh leading the way on this whole entrepreneurship stuff,
That's right.
it's that's my long answer, man. It's just so hard. I think again, just have conversations and people like yourself, myself, that are open to like these types of chats. These things have led me to multiple opportunities across my career, whether it's getting hired fractionally, um,
Mm,
new opportunities I've never even heard of because you can only research so much, right?
that's right.
You only have so much time in the day. And yes, do the hobbies thing, learn something new, just talk to people. That's the simplest thing I can maybe suggest here. So, I'll pass it back to you, dude. Like, what are your thoughts there?
On the hiring, yeah. And it's funny. I mean, you gave me a bit of a different perspective too, because sometimes I feel like I forget that you're right. There's humans on the other end of this. I do see, like,
Yeah.
I had a really weird experience recently, which kind of showed me a lot of how much I think the process is a bit broken. And this is just I'm extrapolating maybe too much from this experience, but it seems like to me that there's a wave of AI candidates, people that are using AI to spam essentially companies, and some
Hmm.
companies trying to fight back by using AI to also then filter. And so
Yeah.
I had this interview 8 months ago with a company I shall not name, right?
Hmm.
And they sent me a peer review to do. I did the peer review. It was immediately rejected. I went on
Hmm.
Glassdoor. I saw this. Thousands of people had this experience. I'm like, there's no way I have humans reviewing thousands of these. I said, okay,
Right.
forgot about it. It's one of the many rejections I'll get. Not a big deal. They called me up 2 weeks ago. Said, hey, we made a big mistake. we've been we've been auto rejecting people. We haven't found any candidates, and we've made a big mistake. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. You're correcting that. But I'm like thinking
Mhm.
that was 8 months ago. How
Yeah.
this is not a good process, and
I was speaking to the choir, man.
yeah, I'm like this can't work, and because I feel like there's I mean, I've been on the hiring side too. You know, and I was an engineering
Mhm.
manager and I was hiring people, and it wasn't like we had a flood of bad candidates, but it wasn't like we had a flood of
Mhm.
great candidites. And then we'd go through like a
Mhm.
7 round interview process, and I'm like, why are we doing 7 rounds of interviews? You know,
Mhm.
do we really need to do this? And we'd lose candidates
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
the thing. But yeah, like kind of echoing what you said, I see a big portion of this, something I didn't take seriously for a long time, is
Mhm.
the networking. And it feels almost cliche to say that because I feel like everybody says it, like it's, but the way you do it, of course, is way more important than just like the idea of networking. Because now I've learned to like it, like talking with you, like meeting you. We
Yeah.
had shared interest. You have an interesting story. I'm like, oh, cool. I genuinely want to know more about that and speak
Mhm.
with you. And I've met so many people online just from just being curious and starting conversations. It can start from like a
Yeah.
comment under a post. Like, yeah, that's how we
Mhm.
got on this podcast. Actually, was
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
comment,
Yeah.
under, and then like next thing you know, we're speaking and having a good time and learning about each other. So
Yeah.
that's the thing. I think genuine curiosity leads to these actual relationships or connections you can make, and who knows where they lead to. They can lead to a job. They
Mhm.
can just lead to interesting conversations, all sorts of things. But I do think that is
Yeah.
a big key that a lot of people forget that we're all humans. You know, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
that we work with humans. It's not just transactional in nature all the
Yeah.
time. You know.
Yeah. That's absolutely correct, true, man. And I think the 2 points I want to make is the process you went through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think for some reason people think recruiters are excluded from that process. Like when I was interviewing for roles, I would get the same rejections 4 months later, right, from companies that
Yeah.
I applied to, and so that's just funny. I just think that if you use AI on the front end, you better make sure you turned on the right settings and turned off the ones you don't
Right.
want, right?
For sure.
Auto rejecting 1,000 candidates, that's a really hard PR to kind of escape from, especially when it gets on Reddit. You're done. There's no coming
Oh,
back from
yeah, it
Reddit.
blew up. It went on fire.
Yeah,
I saw on Glassdoor. I was like,
yeah,
whoa, it blew up.
yeah.
It's pretty funny.
Um, Gosh, what was my second point you mentioned? Oh, the networking piece. So just for folks
Mm-hmm.
listening right now, this is how I
Yeah.
met, or Brian and I are meeting right now. So Wyatt Hoffman is a mutual friend of yours, a mutual friend of ours.
Yeah. That's
And
right.
yeah, I think a couple of years ago, I posted about putting hobbies on your resume and how it's actually the right thing to do because we want, people like myself who interview folks. At least, I like to think that the majority of us like this is, I like talking about people's hobbies and interests because there's two
Yeah.
things around that question when I say, hey, what do you do for fun? What type of world problems you want to solve? I'm actually genuinely interested in what they're learning because I love learning. So I'll maybe take some of their responses and go learn on my own, whether it's more about gaming or anime or running, rugging, you name it. Most of my hobbies have come from interviews where I've asked people, "What do you
Oh,
do?" I'm like,
interesting.
"Holy crap! Yeah,
Okay.
I've never thought about that. Maybe I should take up lacrosse or
Yeah.
go hiking in this area of the world." And then Wyatt posted, he commented, "Yeah, man, you're so right. I mountain bike and I do this and that." And I'm like, "Wow, that's super interesting. I didn't never thought about mountain biking as like a hobby I
Mm-hmm.
could take on." But he does some serious mountain biking to where he's
That's right.
off terrain
Yeah.
and he's gotten injured a couple of times. And then I think the next step after that, you and I was a guest on your Parsity podcast or a webinar with Wyatt, maybe
That's
8 months
right.
ago.
To be
Yeah,
honest, I kind of forgot about that. That's right. You both were on
yeah,
there. That was a really good one too. That was a
yeah,
really
yeah.
good one.
That
We've done
was
so many of them. Yeah.
yeah. And then that podcast, that episode led to a connection with a couple of the folks that you guys were mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
And I had it in my mind, like, I gotta chat with Brian one day. And so, obviously still following you on LinkedIn, love what you're posting. It just makes so
Appreciate it.
much sense. Yeah, yeah, of course. And it's super transparent, it's practical, it's like from the hip. Like this is the right advice. And when this year kicked off, I said, you know what? I'm gonna put the coaching aside. Let me get back to my roots and start recruiting again. But I
Mm-hmm.
really want to take, these conversations across the year, just learning from everyone and then maybe write a book next year, right? And this is actual
I like
concepts in my
that.
head. Yeah,
Yeah.
because if you think about, we're gonna date ourselves here, Chicken Soup for the Soul, right? One of my favorite
Oh
series.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, growing up.
That's
What if there
right.
was like a job search series, like,
Mm-hmm.
the 5 minute job seeker playbook for, whatever the variable is. Um, so yeah, for those listening, this is how Brian and I are on this in this conversation now, and I think we likely will continue networking and whatever you want to call it, being friends, chatting, maybe going on a run
Yeah.
together. This is how that happened, and it was nothing planned. It, honestly, if you want to distill it down to one thing, it was LinkedIn. Just being active on LinkedIn,
Yeah. Straight
posting
up.
those comments, and I'll share one more thing about LinkedIn too. I posted just my story
Hmm.
about how I got rejected from a
I read
second
that.
round interview. Yeah, yeah, the
Yeah.
hiring
It's a
manager.
good one.
There was two of them. There was two of them. One was
Yeah.
like in person, but there was the initial one that I wrote maybe in November. Talked about, hey, I'm in the interview with the hiring manager, who's the VP of talent at this gaming company, which I really
Hmm.
adored. And she had asked me, what's your greatest strengths and weaknesses? I got so offended. I was like, why are we still asking this? We're like recruiters. Like, can we have a conversation? And I literally said, I work well within teams, and sometimes I send emails with typos. And the reason why I said that, literally 2 days prior, I had sent an email to the entire company. This is when I was
I
at
read
Crunchyroll.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the answer I had in top of my mind. It wasn't premeditated. It was like, well, shit, I screwed up here.
Yeah.
That took off to like, I don't know, 50,000 impressions, 1,000, engagements, and just all these interactions. And I actually
Hmm.
made a couple friends from that.
Yeah.
A lady from, I think she's in somewhere in the European Union. She's also a recruiter. And
Okay.
someone else who had mentioned that, yeah, my cousin used to work at Jamba Juice, and they would ask what type of fruit you think you would be. That kind of took off into its own humorous Reddit channel and stuff. So like, even just have fun on LinkedIn, and just go where you feel like you're having the most fun, and you'll make connections. Sure.
Also, just being genuine. Like, people can smell it. You know what I mean? When you're genuine,
100%.
you can tell. And when people write these like Chat GPT uh, posts and things like that, or just things that are just like disingenuous, it's like humans, we're really good at this. We're really good at like telling when somebody's being like genuine or being real and not. You know what I mean? Uh, I am curious about this though. You've handled rejection like all of us. You're a
Yeah.
recruiter. You probably like helped reject people. You've been rejected. How do you deal with rejection? Because as a human, like being rejected it's emotional for a lot of us. Like I still
Mm-hmm.
don't like it. Even if I go to a company that I don't want to work for and I get
Mm-hmm.
rejected, kind of hurts. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you
100%.
handle it? Because you kind of sound like, my impression from you is that you're like, yeah, it's rejection, not a big deal. Or you turn the rejection into a relationship with another person. You said earlier too. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is like
Yeah.
your how do you approach rejection in general?
Yeah. I think if you do it enough times, it just becomes practice.
Okay.
You know, so when I was at Crunchyroll, best job I've ever had, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were in office. Office was fantastic. People were fantastic. But I really wanted to leave and just grow my career and do recruiting the way I wanted to. And just for context, that's where recruiting as a product was coined between myself and my manager at the time, Crystal. And we used Jira, Confluence, Greenhouse, and just kind of build this infrastructure to make hiring much faster. We were in a very niche space of anime and streaming video, and there weren't
Mm-hmm.
many folks at the time that had that background. So in order to move people quickly through the funnel, and if we knew we had someone great, we built this entire automated process. It was, I shouldn't say automated, it was human automated, really. But there
Okay.
was a specific set of tasks that we needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
If this person was strong, we would ping these folks. We would need a response in 12 hours, and we would move forward. Comp was already taken care of at the very beginning. Um, so my point is, when I was thinking about leaving Crunchyroll, I just started applying everywhere. Places that I enjoyed, places that seemed like a fit. And when I would get on the phone, I guess it helps if you have a job. So I'm not going to discount that. It helps
For
if you have
sure.
a job, so you can go in there testing the waters, right? And the most successful
Mm-hmm.
folks currently still have a role. They don't wait till things kind of hit the fan. And you kind of assess the interviewer, the initial call with the recruiter, what their style is. Is it like, hey, thanks for your interest in, you know, uh, Parsity. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and the first question is, I'd love to learn about you. So maybe tell me about yourself.
Yeah.
Red flag for me from the get go. So then I know that, okay, if this question is still being answered, I need to have my pitch ready. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, Brian. decade in recruiting. Throughout my career, I've coined recruiting as a product to where I feel that, it should feel and look like a product where it's iterated within each organization. And within that organization, different verticals. So if I'm working with engineering, we'll focus more on those things. Product and design will focus more on process and roadmap and documentation. So I see that, recruiting can be different at each organization. And I've done multiple types of scaling in the last decade. So that's a little bit about me on a professional level. If you'd like to learn more about, what I do for fun, I'm in law school. I'm learning employment law, which I think is interesting and useful for this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than take much more of your time, if there's any follow-up questions I can answer around those things, happy to share more. Right. And I think saying things like that puts you in the driver's seat of the conversation. Here's what I'm going to tell
Mm-hmm.
you. And I'm asking you to follow up on those specific things. And if you practice that enough, you can kind of shift it. When they say create a resume for each job, you kind of you kind of iterate your pitch for a role. If it's a fintech role, I might lean
Mm-hmm.
more on like, I shouldn't say fintech. Let's say I'm chatting with a CFO. This is a real story. At Comure, I interviewed the CFO and I said, same pitch, but I said, I really, love building roadmaps and projections and understanding what the end goal is. Because if you talk like that with a CFO, like, wow, they're doing road mapping, they're understanding
Yeah.
financial projections
Mm-hmm.
and some of the things we're going to run into. When I spoke to the head of security interview there, same pitch, and I said, I've worked pretty, closely with the security teams at Crunchyroll. I've studied OWASP top
Yeah.
10. I know SQL injection, blue team, red team. And that's all I mentioned. And he said,
Damn.
wow, like you are not the
Yeah.
typical recruiter. From there, it was
Yep.
just a chat.
Oh my God. Yeah, that would
So
stand out. That would super make you stand out right there.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
good one. Yeah.
And so I guess when I was interviewing, I did that all the time. I would say, I know what you're going to ask me. It's always going to be, tell me
Mm-hmm.
about yourself. And I realized people just want to know how good you are, or sorry,
Mm-hmm.
want to know how you're going to solve their problem. So for security, I did that. It was a 30-minute interview, lasted 15 minutes. We just shot the shit afterwards.
Yeah.
Same with product. The same pitch, head of product.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, also I use, hey, this is me, 10 years recruiting. And by the way, I'm very versed in Confluence and Notion and Coda, and I've built product roadmaps for recruiting and do retrospectives, every couple of weeks with my team and the hiring manager. So we're all aligned in how we're doing things. And this product manager, this chief product officer, when I was working with him, was notorious for not being able to get a hold of or whatnot. I just typed the
Mm-hmm.
documentation for him and we just chat. Never had a meeting with them, but I hired for his team. So I think interviewers are just really trying to get a certain
Yeah.
responsibility off their plate to someone that's going to do it really well.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I don't think many folks want to manage a large team, right? If you can
Yeah.
do without that. So long way to say, when I was interviewing, I just experimented and I tried to run the entire conversation myself.
Dude, that's really smart. Like I kind of been doing a little bit of this like after years of just sucking at interviews to be honest because when people used to ask me I mean, I used to
Yeah.
just, I didn't get the game, right? Like,
Hmm.
because this is I think you have a super good point. Because I do mock interviews now with Parsity people, with
Hmm.
students in Parsity, we do mock interviews, right? And
Yeah.
I'll ask the question, tell me about yourself. It's a loaded question, as you know.
Hmm.
Because I don't really want it, no one really wants to know, like, everything. Some people start like, they're like, well, I was born here. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, don't do that. Because you're right. Like, what
Yeah.
they're really asking, what they're trying to get at is like, why are you here today and how can you kind of help me, like do we have any shared motivations
Hmm.
in here? Do we have anything that's going to let me know that I can trust you? Like, I'm trying to gauge how much I can trust you, what you can tell me about me that makes sense for like why you're here. And you're right, everybody has a bit of a different motivation. Like when I talk to a product person now, I'm not going to lean into like, well, I know React and JavaScript and I've worked on this full stack application and all these server side projects I've done and things like that. I'm going to have a very different conversation about how I've worked with product, right? And when if I talked to the CEO at one company too, and I completely broke down. I was completely unprepared because he asked me. He said, "What do you know about e-commerce?" And I'm like, uh,
E-commerce, what?
yeah, I'm like, I had like a panic attack. I'm like, I thought this was like a coding interview. I'm like, well, but why would he want to know about coding stuff? He's a CEO,
Mm,
you know?
right,
And that
right.
taught me I was a bit naive in my approach. And I've been doing a lot more of what you said. I've been actually using ChatGPT to do this
Hmm.
by saying, help me. Like, I have some stories in my like backlog of things I've done. I have like my what's it, my brag document essentially. Like over the years, here's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
some major projects I've done, and these kind of like here's showing how I worked well with the team. Here's showing a project that went wrong and what I learned from it. Here's showing a project that
Hmm.
went right. Here's pieces that I can use to show pieces of myself and
Yeah.
to answer questions people are likely to ask. And then I'll dump it in ChatGPT and say, hey, help me craft it for this particular person. That's actually been really helpful. It gives me something to
Yeah.
talk about because, as you know, most of our interviews now are on camera. We're
Yep.
not in an office anyway, so you can prepare even more than you used to be able to, and have a piece of paper right there if you need to. I don't know how moral or ethical that is or not, but to me it's helpful because then I can actually talk about what I want to talk about without losing track of my thought or my memory
Hmm.
and completely just zoning out or forgetting what they've been asking.
No, yeah, dude.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just, I think you're spot on with that. It's ethical or not. Like, I mean, no one really makes the rules for this, right? At the end of the
yeah,
day,
that's the thing too.
you know,
Yeah.
a business is trying to do one thing, which is generate revenue by selling a product.
Mm-hmm.
If we hire folks or interview folks, we want to know where they would fit in that specific problem set or doing that product, and if they're going to do it well, right? Um, so when you see teams, this is what happened when I was at my last company. Like we're hiring for a ton of infrastructure engineers and backend engineers, um, uh, and like middleware engineers, I guess you call it. I forget the term. We're likely going to be building a platform very, very soon, right? So we did that,
Uh-huh.
and when companies put out X amount of headcount, one, I'll let you know, it's not really an art form. It should be much more critical than it is. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, I need 5 people. Like, well, why do you need 5 folks? Have you done capacity planning on why these folks would
Mm-hmm.
be an asset? How much would it cost? Oftentimes, engineering managers, and correct me if I'm wrong, in your space, were like, I need these, and these. But you don't understand, like, the cost of that is just, it's not just salary. There's like a 40%, on top fee for benefits, right?
I learned this. Yeah, I
Yeah,
learned this after the fact. I was like, oh, yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
so where was I going with this? Dude, I lost my train of thought. You're
No,
speaking up.
it was mostly about being like prepared and going in for the interview like by having like kind of preloaded questions.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So, and then I guess when in this scenario, when I was interviewing, like, dude, I was like taking like 4 or 5 interviews a day, 45 minutes a piece,
Mm-hmm.
context switching from back end to ops infra, and some like VP level roles. The best conversations I had that kept me engaged throughout, hours of conversation were ones just like this.
Ah,
Just have it. And then, because when you get
yeah.
past that first question, tell me about yourself. And if it's really good, and you tell me all the technology like that we need and what you've done, the team size you worked with, how long the project took. That was my point. It's having stories in your back pocket. How long the
Oh
project
yeah.
took, how much it impacted the company, and you don't have to even talk about the bottom line. It's more so we launched this really cool feature, or we fixed all these bugs, or internally, we built this tooling to help developers increase you know, um, their debug time by X amount of hours.
Yeah.
At that point, the interview's done. The first 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so what do you do for fun? Tell me more about that specific debug project. 'Cause now I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to learn. Like, how the hell does,
Yeah. How'd you
Elasticsearch
do this
work?
thing? Yeah. Oh
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so those are learning moments for me from a career perspective. So I don't know if any other folks do this, but if the interview is done in 5 minutes, now it's like, cool, I got another 30 minutes to learn from this person. Let me get better at my job by asking about, no code, low code, what the heck, SSRI is, things on your resume. And I'm like, okay, I didn't know what that was. Let me see what that means. Oh, you went to CMU, what it was like at Carnegie Mellon, or it's just those are
Oh,
the things that,
you're a genuinely curious person though. That's really, which is
uh,
probably why obviously you're doing this. You're doing more than what's expected of you because you're a genuinely curious, overachieving type person is my
yeah,
impression. But
yeah, I
that's
just
really
love
cool.
it.
I don't. That's not always my experience in interviews, but but that's a really good impression too. When you meet somebody like you and you're on the candidate side, that
Yeah.
makes you feel like, oh, this is probably a good company. This person's actually interested. They're not just kind of going through the motions. And I think I forget about that too. That as a recruiter, if I'm not mistaken, you're also trying to sell the candidate on the job too, right?
Oh, big time. Yeah. And that's why I like working at early stage startups. It's because I get to share the story of a company or a product that could change the world. And I don't say that lightly. Like Commure, when I was there, and they're still solving this problem, unifying all the data silos within healthcare and hospital systems. That's a huge initiative. I'm like, wow, that's a very cool problem to solve. But we can do that. You know, every human being in the United States can maybe have more
Mm-hmm.
efficient, user experiences in these hospitals. I think now they're doing transcription, AI transcription for doctors, which is super helpful as well.
Oh
You know,
man, I can
imagine being a
imagine.
doctor, having to have a scribe there take your notes, right? It's more like
Yep.
sounds like a recruit or like an executive and an executive assistant relationship. Now
Yeah.
it's being transcribed live, being mapped into an application, which then provides the information to the patient and the doctor and next steps, right? I think that's super huge. And I had to sell this idea to folks that were, working at Lyft, Google, and Amazon. Like, this is a platform we're
Mm.
building. It's low code, no
Mm-hmm.
code. We're using Golang. Parts of the code base is in Rust, which I know is super cool. And
Yeah.
I'm just this whole theater act of we brought on board a ton of folks, and a lot of folks have stayed. The majority of folks unfortunately had to, be let go, including myself, due to
Oh, okay.
companies pivoting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, recruiters, we usually last a little bit longer just to kind of do the transition. And before I got
Yeah.
laid off, I was actually built out a Slack group and like an offboarding process for folks that got let go because I felt like this needs to be done better than what it was.
Mm.
And now I'm contracting with the seed stage startup in AI, and same thing.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
while this product is actually much easier to evangelize and sell, it's really me as the first point of contact to the interviewee. Like, okay, is this guy cool? Is he easy to get
Mm-hmm.
along with? And in my conversations, I usually edify the rest of the panel. Like, you're going to meet this gentleman, this lady, this gentleman, and here's who they are and what they stand for. And then I
Okay.
edify the founders. And by the time my conversation is over with, 80% of the job is done. They know what they're walking into.
Yeah.
Then I prepare them for what the conversations entail at a very high level. I'm not going to ask very um, off the wall questions that don't matter
Mm-hmm.
anymore. And then at the end of the day, my only goal is if we hire you, you're going to enjoy it. But if you decide not to join us, at least I have another friend in the industry where I can reach out to, and vice versa,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
Um, Going back to the whole networking thing.
I've kept in contact with a few recruiters over the years, which has been really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes I've spoken to people that I talked to years ago. I think the last role I had was a short contract. I got laid off last year too, in the middle of last year, and immediately I found a job really quickly, very lucky, but also because I kind of have a built-in network at this point, and it was much easier. I didn't apply really the jobs I applied to. I never heard back from, but through the recruiter, quickly got a job. Then I after that contract, I got into another role. I kind of want to pivot into this question though, because having you as a recruiter, this is really interesting because there's a narrative
Yeah.
out there online that there's like too many people out there going for the same roles, and it's like
Yeah.
that recruiters are just overwhelmed by a breadth, a massive amount of these really great candidates, and now they're just getting to pick and choose. Is that true?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, um, if you
Okay.
think about just the sheer number of folks that are applying to a role, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to this day, I don't think I've seen a report come out of an ATS that tells anything other than like time to hire, right? The only things we look for is how fast we're hiring. There was even a point in time where we were measuring quality of hire, and that's still being done,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of ambiguous. Like, what does quality of hire mean?
Yeah. What does that
Is it
mean?
how
Yeah.
long they stay? How much
How good they were, how much they
how good they
contributed,
were.
you know?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. And that becomes an OKR thing. Then you got to get that report. But who's doing reports of people that have left the company? Like, I just don't. Anyhow,
Mm.
so
Yeah.
a couple stories here. So this is almost 6, 7 years ago at Crunchyroll. Hosted a role. or data scientist. In the first 24, 36 hours, 250 applications. And I knew that was going to happen because, yeah, it's a lot, right? So that does happen, which is fine. What a lot of folks what the narrative is out there, like, oh, recruiters have to look at these resumes one by one because that's what we do. We want to be fair. We want to do things right. And that's the correct answer, right? The better answer is if the resume is written in text, there's got to be a way to search through this text without having to look through every person's resume, right? And I'm talking very specific technical roles like engineering or anything outside of that. Maybe you'd have to like read into the story. If it's a marketing role, obviously there's MarTech involved.
Sure.
There's tooling, but there's also like verbiage you can't really scan for without looking at it directly. When I say scan for, I don't mean like using a tool or bot. I mean like command,
human eyes,
command F. Right. Well,
Command F.
Keyword search. Yeah, Command F. Yeah.
Keyword. Oh, gotcha.
So I was using Greenhouse at Crunchyroll, and I made a bet on myself. I'm like, I bet out of 250 resumes, there'll be less than 15 that have the qualifications that are on the JD, right? So you can point fingers at the candidate not reading the JD, or the JD's written poorly, the hiring team sucks. You can point fingers at everyone, but whatever. Yeah, you're not going to be able to solve those, or you have no control of those. But of the 250 candidates, I closed the roll off after 3 days. I did a Boolean search, and I made sure to include every single key, every single skill set, whether it's Python, any data engineering or data science, tools and methodologies. Pulled up about 12 folks. I didn't even think about it. Auto emailed, "Hey, thanks for applying. We'd love to meet you." Imagine being a candidate applying within 24 hours, you get a request to have a chat. That's an amazing experience already, right?
For sure.
So if you join that conversation on LinkedIn, like recruiters have too much to do, is one, we're not doing it efficiently. If you think about it, if you're going to read the resume and follow that. But know that there's a trade-off, right? You're going to be pulled into a meeting. You're going to have an interview to go to. So what's the best case scenario here? If you think about data structures and algorithm, like if there's a brute force method that takes the longest, or you can, I think it's called merge sort, where you can kind of split things.
Yeah, like divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer, yeah. So in my mind, I was like, I have an objective to hire this candidate in 30 days. How do I do it and still be fair? So I relied on Boolean searches. Nowadays, if I were to have the same scenario, I would just have ChatGPT write a Boolean search for me. Same thing, but have it right. Take the job description that we have. Hey, GPT, write up a Boolean search for me to input into my Lever database or my Ashby database or my Greenhouse database, and then output the resumes that match. That's all we're doing is we're looking for keywords. We're looking for some phrases and stories.
Yeah.
It's impossible. And I'm going to die on this hill. If you say you're reading every single resume end to end for a single role,
it's probably all you're doing.
It's probably all you're doing, and it's a very antiquated process, right? There's no speed. That's the brute force method. There's no speed involved. And speed is one of the best, the most advantageous thing you can do for a candidate. Quickly make a decision.
100%. Yeah, it's better than 8 months, right?
Exactly.
Better than calling somebody back 8 months. Hey, my bad. Do you want to interview now? I'm like, well, not really.
No, but, like,
it's kind of weird.
So that's my answer to that conversation has been going on for decades. Like,
jeez, dude, that was really insightful. Actually, to you, that probably is like something. Oh, that's normal. That gave me a whole different mental model for what you're doing. That I never would have. I knew something like that was probably happening, but I didn't know, to be honest. I worked with a recruiter when I was working at a big company, and I was hiring, and she would send me some resumes. We'd get like 300 candidates, and then somehow she would send me like 20. I'm like, I don't know how you did that. I don't know where these 20 appeared from, and I didn't ask, which I probably should have. I should have been more curious, but I was busy with my own stuff. And then I'd get 20 on my desk, and then I would go through them one by one and actually read through them. But she was doing that initial filtering for me before I ever saw them, which was interesting. And I wonder if she was doing something similar to what you did. Very interesting.
I think her approach could have been along the lines of, when you hire a recruiter, and let's say I'm new to Parsity, and this is like a 200-person organization. I have a sliver of time to gain your trust.
Yeah.
And that's the first 2 weeks. through emails, introductions, Slacks, whatever, however my communication is, my work style, my documentation.
Mm-hmm.
That's for me to prove to you that I'm going to be a good recruiter and good partner. And on that same note, caveat is you're always in an interview. You're always interviewing. Your
Yeah.
work is a representation of you and who you're going to keep in contact with after X company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I typically like to do is when I go through the resumes, if there's any resumes I'm unsure of, I will tag the hiring manager in the database. Say, hey, I'm unsure about this part of the resume. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
And 9 times out of 10, they'll come back like, oh, they're actually pretty good. Let's talk to them at least, because even though, although this is a hiring manager speaking, although we're kind of concerned about this area, let's just have a chat with them.
Yeah.
Because 9 times, obviously, as a hiring manager as well, you kind of want to be empathetic because you understand, people deserve opportunities and recruiters
Right.
are more the
Yeah.
gatekeepers. And what I think she did was she knew well enough and she's experienced enough and trusted her gut that these
Mm-hmm.
people are going to work well here, right? We read through it, we see kind of some signals around, I don't want to say pedigree, but the way things are written, the way the story is told, the technologies, the schools, all that comes into play into like one big product, right? Let's say if the resume is a product that is done really
Yeah.
well, we move it forward because we know you're going to be delighted reading the resume, right? So there's this
Mm-hmm.
continual transactional experience. So that's probably what she did. Whether it was a Boolean search, which I'm assuming it was, or some tool,
Yeah.
our
But
job is
somehow
to
to like
get,
filter this massive amount.
yeah,
That's funny. I mean, I'm pretty impressed that you knew about merge sort too. That was a pretty accurate way of
yeah,
describing it. That's
that's for
pretty funny.
studying. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You're
Yeah,
you're,
on
you're
that
definitely
note
not your average
too,
recruiter.
right on. Yeah, I enjoy this too much, I guess. But on that same note, there could have also been
Hmm.
questions in the application process. And for
Oh
that data
yeah.
science role,
Hmm.
I had a question. Do you have 4+ years of experience in these technologies?
Yeah.
The folks that answered no, it would auto tag them with too junior.
Gotcha. Yeah.
The folks that answered yes would tag them strong candidate. So in that same Boolean search, I can actually just do a tag search in
Oh
Lever or at the
yeah.
time
Yeah.
the Screenhouse, and it pulled up all the candidates that were tagged strong. So I knew this that I was using Greenhouse as an assistant to myself in my eyes, and I would review them. Right, if there was only 4 or 5 that
Hmm.
were strong candidates, I would review them like, cool, yep, this sounds good, this looks good.
Yep.
Check to see if they need a visa or not. Check to see if anything was off with the tenure. Because
Hmm.
if they answer 4+ years and it's only like an intern, that's my fault, right?
Yeah.
I
It's
got
kind
to
of weird.
check
Yeah.
that real
Right.
quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So just 2 things: inbound questions that actually make sense for us to sort in the back end, and then using Boolean to quickly take 250 down to 12.
Yeah.
And then the cool thing is, email all of them. They have a great experience up front. Hiring manager gets their resumes within 48 hours. Everyone's happy, right? We're just now having to massage the situation because Murphy's Law is going to come up. Someone's going to miss an interview.
Yeah. For sure.
Someone's going to be rescheduled.
Yeah.
You know, there's going to be a referral coming in from the CEO that you have to take the call no matter what, regardless if they're good or not. All that stuff happens in flight. So just gotta get ready for it.
Okay. I got to ask you one last. I know we're coming up on time, but I got to ask you one last thing.
Yeah, yeah.
What's like the biggest mistake you see candidates make when it comes to either resumes or the initial screening phone call?
Top of my head, first of all, I don't care if it's 1, 2, 3 pages, right?
Okay.
Let's,
Okay.
the
Cool.
hero section, right? That's what I call it, the hero section.
Uh huh.
On their resume, the first half have to be inviting, have to give me the information I initially want.
Okay.
What company you're working at. And Sam Struan does a really good job at this, explaining on his LinkedIn profile. Where have you worked? How long you worked there? What tools, technologies you use? What you solve for? If I can initially look at the first half of the first page and see everything I need, then now I'm locked in. I'm gonna go down to the next experience. Okay, cool. I see certain acronyms in Python. Okay, cool. Then I go down to the third, and then at the same time, I'm adding up years of experience in that
Mm-hmm.
resume. And then I go to the second page. I see if they have hobbies, what type of education. Education is typically, okay, cool, they went to school. You know what I mean? But if there's something like, they double undergrad at Harvard, and went to Columbia, then I'll look deeper into that, like why they do
Mm.
that, right? What did else they
Yeah.
study that may be adjacent? So at the end of the day, second by page, hero section, maybe testimonials or whatever you want to call it. And
Yeah,
that's what really gets me spending more time on a resume. So in order for me to do that well, though, the font has to be big enough. And that's the one thing I would just say.
oh man,
Font
okay.
size matters, line
Whoa,
spacing matters, indentation matters, neatness of and readability matters. If you think about when you're writing code, right? If it's all mashed up together, it's going to be like, I don't
for
want to read
sure. Like
this.
using a
You know what I
linter
mean?
obviously is like,
Yeah,
yeah, you have to have it formatted. Yeah, I didn't
exactly.
think about this, but yes, that's a
Yeah.
really good point.
And that's how I screen resumes. And folks will tell you like we spend most time in the top left corner. The heat map says this, and we're in the. It's really, again, if the job is Python developer and your title says solutions architect, what are we doing here? I'm gonna automatically pass. But you have Python experience 5 years ago, like
Yeah.
bottom line up front, right? That was a military term, BLUF, bottom line up front. What's the most important thing you can share with the reader
Okay.
at the very top? And it's not like an elite thing, right? It's like if you're communicating nowadays digitally, we're competing with Instagram, we're competing with LinkedIn. Like if you want someone to
Yeah. You want
read
that
your
quick,
stuff, yeah, let
yeah,
them know what's going
immediate
on there.
feedback.
So that's what I would say in as far as the application resume process, and this goes with how anyone in their entire career. If you were just out of college or out of coding program, make it compelling to read. No gimmicks, no nothing about I don't know. Um, what am I? Why am I saying Roblox? I don't know. But it just don't no gimmicks, straightforward. Make sure
Gotcha.
the resumes are readable, the font's large enough, and I think folks will understand. Like, there's the whole idea about don't use Comic Sans, but there's also like another idea like don't use
Oh yeah.
any of those other fonts have their own emotions, right? If you study
Hmm.
that in style guides and design, you'll understand which fonts to use. Calibri, Arial, Times New Roman feels a bit 1990s, but
Yeah.
it's readable. Some folks prefer that. And the second piece in interviews, you gotta. Here's my best advice. I always tell folks: if it's on a phone call, take it
Hmm.
standing up and walking around so you can breathe. It's a sales call, right? You're gonna
Yeah.
pitch yourself. You need to smile over the phone. People can definitely, feel you smiling. The
This is
energy
true.
changes.
Yes.
Yeah, it changes
Hmm.
incrementally. And when you're walking around and also have earbuds wired if possible. I wouldn't do Bluetooth if you can avoid it. And as you're walking around, you're pacing, and they ask you, "Tell me about yourself." You're not
Hmm.
sitting down. There's energy moving through the conversation, and I 100% guarantee you the other person on the phone can feel the energy, can feel you smiling, and you may have been likely the only person that day of the 5 or 6 conversations that did that. Now you're moving to the next round. There's an element of emotion and body language that people don't talk about often. So resumes,
Man.
readability, interviews, you've got to be like you're selling something. So
Man, you got too much game, dude. You got to.
this is why we're here, man. I'm trying to share with the world that you've had an incredible story, man. So this was all about me, though, dude. You got time or a couple more minutes about your story? Or what's
Oh
up?
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely,
Yeah, yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I know that you've had quite the journey. What was
Yeah.
it like coding boot camp? Challenges in getting a job. How did you land your first job? We'll call it that. What's the story around that?
Oof. Yeah. So it's a really weird one, actually. I
Hmm.
don't know if I've already shared it in depth, actually, how this happened. So I went through
No.
this coding, but I had pretty much taught myself how to code at this point already. Like backstory, I got sober. I was doing bad stuff, and then I coded a bunch, and I kind of switched my addictive personality and mindset into coding, for better or worse. But it helped me accelerate my trajectory as far as learning. So I was like really into it. I was like, this is the best thing ever. I want to do this nonstop. And then I was just like learning, learning, learning. And I found people that would help me out and teach me. We live in the Bay Area, so we're very lucky. I
Hmm.
could go to, like, I was in Oakland and I was learning from people like at a coffee shop. They had like a meetup,
Nice.
and people were saying, oh, here, like, why
Yep.
are you writing code in Code Academy? Do you use Sublime Text at the time? I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, and that
Yep. Yep.
shut off a light bulb. Next thing you know, I go to this coding boot camp because I'm like, okay, I want somebody, I want to do this for a living. This is crazy that you can get paid for this. And
Hmm.
so I went there. They didn't teach me a ton, but what they did do was they said, you got to start applying for jobs. And I was like, I don't think I'm ready. And
Yeah.
so I started applying. This is in a different time period. This is 2017 or 2016, something like that. Or was it 2015? Something like that. It was like about 10
Hmm.
years ago.
Hmm.
And I'm applying and not getting much, but I was going to in-person interviews and getting pretty universally rejected. It's
Hmm.
in-person interviews just because I wasn't selling myself very well. I didn't know the game. This is really my first professional experience in general.
Right.
I didn't know. I was ignorant to a lot of things at that time. I one hadn't really had a professional job, and I didn't understand how corporate America works in general. I also didn't understand what software engineers really were expected to do. I get a call back at Grocery Outlet.
Mm.
It's a chain of grocery stores in the Bay Area. If you're
Yep.
from here,
Yep.
you probably know. And they're like, "Yeah, why don't you come in for an interview?" The guy that saw my resume, I worked with in a warehouse years prior, where I was
No
driving a
way.
van for a summer camp, and I was in this
Wow.
warehouse, and I used to take my son down there, and we'd drop off boxes and stuff like that. And this dude remembered one thing about me. He's like, that guy was always on time, always here, and he was working hard. Right? I
Wow.
worked 6 days a week back then in a truck, um, he invited me in for that reason.
Hmm.
And I barely recognized him. His name was Shane, and he had basically become an engineering manager at this place. And yeah, it's crazy, right?
Wow.
Yeah, years later. So, and I've totally forgot who he was. I'm like, wait, you look familiar. He's like, yeah, you don't remember me? And we used to work together here. We had a mutual connection at this place. And he said that he called the guy up and made sure I wasn't crazy. The guy actually said some good things about me. And then I come in there, and I actually passed the technical interview, and that's how I got my first job. It was also extremely low pay for the
Hmm.
Bay Area. I think I didn't I asked for $55,000, and they
Hmm.
actually came in at 60. So they it was so low that they actually gave me more than I expected.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was a place where you had to wear slacks and a dress
Yep.
shirt as a software engineer, and I was punching into a clock at the place.
Yeah.
But it was the best experience ever. I was so happy. It was like the best job I ever had, and I still really love that
Yeah.
place. Yeah,
Oh
but I
my
left
God,
after
dude.
about 2 years because I was like, once I realized how much money you could make in the Bay Area, I was like, wait a second, what am I doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
I gotta
Yeah.
get out of here. So
Dude, no, I mean, I think, side note to that story, but then I'm going to ask you one more thing about the journey.
sure.
I actually quit recruiting in 2017, and I went to college, Mills at the time, which is had a
Oh,
co-ed
okay.
master's program. Yeah, it was a co-ed
Uh huh.
program for interdisciplinary computer science, right? And all that was like, you don't have to have an undergrad in computer science. You just take whatever
Hmm.
your undergrad is, apply computer science knowledge to it, and then you go out to the world and become an engineer. I lasted like 2 semesters. Java was my kryptonite. I was like, I can't do this.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but I only did that because when I was a recruiter, I was making 56K a year. I was like, I'm interviewing software engineers making
Yeah, right. Making a
90K.
ton.
Why don't
Yeah.
I just do that?
Hmm.
It was such a difficult journey. But to your story, how cool is it that this individual knew you through a mutual friend and understood that your work ethic
Yeah.
was, you were low risk. Like, like, okay, this guy, I know him from years ago through a friend.
Hmm.
He's on time. How, like, it's crazy how important being punctual is,
Oh, for
doing good
sure.
work, and being a good team player. And I think
Yeah.
that's that's kind of crazy, man. To hit
It
your
was
first
really
gig.
wild. I've always been
Yeah.
super weird about time too. I'm like very much like I have to be punctual. I don't want people to have a bad impression, and I know that's a way that you can.
Yeah.
It's the easiest way to have a good impression, just being on time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
it goes to show you never know who you're going to meet in general, and it's like you don't know how the Bay Area, like most of other parts of like other industries, it's pretty interconnected. I'm sure you run into the same people all the time too, and you just never know. I mean, I run into the same people in the Bay Area. It's a huge place, but at the same time, it feels really small sometimes. It's like go to different companies. I interviewed the same
Yeah.
guy at two different companies in the Bay Area. I'm like, man, what are the chances I'd be interviewing you at two different companies years apart where I
Wow.
work? So yeah, leave a good
That is
impression.
wild.
I guess is the takeaway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't be that person that
Yeah,
people
don't be a
talk
weirdo.
about
No, don't be
in a
late.
negative way. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So how did you get into the second role? Because obviously, when folks get
Hmm.
into their career, that first job is always going to be the best, right? Like, I made it.
Yeah.
How do you
Made it.
transition
Yeah.
to your second job, and how was the interviewing process as like a mid-level engineer?
That was way different. So I was acutely aware of my shortcomings as a developer. Once I got to that first job, people started talking about big O notation.
Yeah.
I was purely a JavaScript developer. This was a C sharp SQL shop, and I was working with
Hmm.
developers that were somewhere in their 70s. Most were in their, they'd been doing this for 20 plus years, some for
Yeah.
30 or 40 years. It was
Yeah.
crazy. I was like, so they taught me a lot about fundamentals and also about just knowing more than what a boot camp taught me, or kind of me hacking things together.
Yeah.
Then I started interviewing, and I failed. I bombed some interviews pretty badly when the technical portion came, and I was like, okay, this is not going to work. I have some serious gaps here. So then I actually went to another program to learn basically like computer science fundamentals
Hmm.
and interview techniques. I did this twice actually. So this first one I went to is a shorter kind of boot camp style program. Taught me a lot. Taught me a lot of like data structure algorithms style programming, and I went to a small startup at this point. My salary doubled in that leap, so that was
Hmm.
wild. It was actually kind of scary because oddly enough, when they paid me that much, I thought, what are they going to expect of me at this point? Like,
Yeah.
like, am I doing the same job I was doing here? Because
Oh
why?
my God, it's hilarious.
Yeah, I was freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, did they make a mistake? But yeah, that interview was much more intensive, and it was much more technical. So it was like a system design
Hmm.
portion. I met with the entire
Right.
company, and kind of your typical Bay Area style interview pre-pandemic, where I went to the office in San Francisco, met the team, went out to lunch, did some system
Hmm.
design, technical interview, met with the founders and stuff like that. Then
Right.
got an offer. Yeah.
That's
And then my
wild.
expectations rose quite a bit. And then I kept, and over the years, I've been kind of obsessed with interviews, the technical portion of them at least, because I
Hmm.
see that they are a winnable game. And I see that they don't
Yeah.
vary too much between companies. Like some companies definitely have a different flavor, but in general, I feel like you can pretty reasonably study to approach most technical interviews and do
Hmm.
well with them. Outside of like Fang, Fang has they're so structured that those
Yeah.
actually might be quote unquote the easiest to study for, because they really
Hmm.
follow a very specific pattern for like
Yeah.
Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. You can really study for those with a
Hmm.
discrete set of problems. You know.
Yeah. 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 No, I've been there, done that, failed multiple times. I think
No,
it's
me too.
Facebook. Yeah.
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 Oh, I failed Facebook. I failed Google like
Yeah.
3 times so far, but I got
Yeah.
as close as I thought I could get. I was just happy to get past the phone screen at these places. I was
Yeah.
shocked I passed the online assessments and then phone screens,
Hmm.
and then I got to Google's physical on-site back in the days. That was really cool, where I got to actually be on the
Wow.
actual campus and mess up their whiteboards. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. How was the campus?
It's beautiful. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Really nice
Yeah. Yeah.
people. Except for one interviewer was the meanest interviewer I ever had in my entire life. He was the
Hmm.
easily the rudest interviewer ever. He was a not a nice guy. The rest of the people wonderful. I had a great
Hmm.
time, and they took me to
Hmm.
lunch, and it was cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool campus.
Wow. Yeah. I think tech is like, um, so for folks that don't work in tech, right? I have family and friends and, my
Hmm.
wife. It's so interesting to go on some of these campuses, man, and see
Oh
like,
yeah,
wow,
they're huge.
this company is like shifting the way the world works.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there because yes, some of them are so beautifully designed, and people are like, oh, it's just there to keep you so you can sleep and not, and it's like,
I'm
well,
not
not
that
really.
pessimistic. Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't take
exactly.
that pessimistic view of it. I mean, I do think
Yeah.
they've changed the way we worked as a whole. Really, if you think, I think you probably maybe know more about this, but Google's
Hmm.
style of working and their kind of philosophy on like HR and people management
Hmm.
has seemed to kind of spread out into the rest of tech and in general how we
Yeah.
manage people, and kind of what we can expect of tech companies. So in many ways, they were the leader of a lot of the not only the perks and the benefits, but what's expected of engineers kind of across the board. So they've
Yeah.
they've done
No,
a
no.
big change in what we
Yeah.
do in the culture of engineering, I think too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I would say tons of great minds came out of Google X,
Yeah,
and Facebook as they were growing, early on when the perks started, when Facebook started, getting real big and their perks were kind of matching Google's. There was like this whole perk war or benefits war.
that's right.
That's when
Yeah.
things changed. Yeah, and I love it. I love how when you look at compensation and you look at um, the work being done. There's things that people don't talk about often, and while the benefits could be great or not at certain companies, that's actually there's a monetary value to that too, right? There's
For
like a
sure.
lifestyle design on that. So I appreciate
Hmm.
what folks are doing. I like being in office now. I'm in SF 3, 4 days a week. Um,
Okay.
voluntarily. They don't necessarily require us to be in there, but I like being. It's a small team of 6, so You don't
I
get to
feel
know
you.
them.
I go to office 1 day a week now, and I at first I was like, back to the office, but I like being around people, and I like the vibe in San Francisco.
Hmm.
It's not like other places. Like LA has a different vibe. There's not the tech scene.
Yeah.
You go to San Francisco, and there's like Vercel down the street. There's
Oh
Google
yeah.
campus. There's every major tech company is represented, and you could
Yeah.
be bumping into or meeting with some of the top software engineers like in the
Yeah.
world, and they have conferences
Yeah.
you can they're like right next to you. You can go to meetups. It's
Yeah.
just so much energy there in the tech scene that it's a great place to be. You can feel it, and you can people on the train working on code, and you see people in cafes writing code, and
Yeah.
it's just that kind of atmosphere you don't get from working at home. I live in the suburbs in Concord. I don't
Hmm. Yeah.
bump into people doing this really.
You're not gonna see that at Pete's Coffee in Concord. No.
No, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely have to link up in the city, man. I love being out there when I'm out there. This Discord, this Crunchyroll, this, and you just mentioned Vercel. I had a couple
Hmm.
friends that are big JavaScript engineers, and they love Vercel. But
Oh yeah, doing a lot of
dude,
cool things.
wanted to ask you one last thing. This is what I always
Yeah,
ask folks,
yeah,
and
for
maybe
sure.
I'll reciprocate. What's your one bit of advice for job seekers? If you could distill to one thing to do, what would that be?
Man, jeez, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
If I really think like fundamentally and the most generically good thing I can think of is to be curious. Maybe is my one piece of advice. I think about books like How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I
Yeah.
think about a lot of the themes that you were talking about and what makes you an interesting person. You're interesting because you're interested, right? Like you take an interest in reaching out to me or learning about people through your calls, like you've said, or like teaching yourself code and algorithms and things like that. Like these make you interesting genuinely, and then they make people look at you and say, "Wow, this is an interesting person. I kind of want to know about them." And I think at the core of networking and generally advancing in your career is just being genuinely curious. Like find something you're curious
Yeah.
about, and then be open. Maybe it's two pieces of advice. Like be curious, and then expose yourself, not in a weird way, but like expose yourself.
Yeah.
Be online, be present. Ask
Right.
people
Right.
stuff, find ways to make connections with people by being curious, and I think that's a winning strategy in general. So yeah, I guess that'll
Yeah.
be my advice. Now I'm curious
That's
what you're gonna say.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of stole my thunder there, man. I love that piece about the when friends with these people. Great book, and
Yeah.
just the idea of being curious. If I can maybe add to your idea is like maybe simmer down the expectations, right? I think we have this
Mm.
idea of we put so much effort out there into the ether. We should be getting an interview, or we should be, at a certain place in our career at the moment. Um, I think once you drop the expectations and go out there and have fun and be curious, if you said, and be online and expose yourself, I'll say it too. Then it doesn't become like a timeline or a very stressful goal you need to meet.
Hmm.
And if you kind of apply that, I mean, I think, for example, when I was on LinkedIn, I never posted like 4 or 5 years ago. I saw one guy, his name was Sean Washington. Still remember his name. Fantastic dude. He was posting gifs and memes. I was like, oh, this is LinkedIn. You should be doing that, right? Then I started like saying, you know what? I'm on these other social media platforms where I'm like just myself. Let
Hmm.
me at least introduce the gaming side of me on LinkedIn. So I started posting about Legend of Zelda. And when that happened, people started commenting, and I met folks. I was like, wow, this is
Yeah.
so interesting. If I
Hmm.
really kept thinking like the expectation for LinkedIn is to get a job, only to get a job, rather than meet folks, or rather than share some very vulnerable insights about who I am,
Hmm.
that I wouldn't be here 5 years later in this position that I'm in, or even meeting
It's
yourself, right?
true. Yeah.
So I think to your point, being curious, and to my point, just like reducing the expectations. Um, I won't say that it'll change things overnight, but it'll definitely alleviate some stress that folks are having in this market right now. So I guess
Man,
we
I
can kind
love
of
that.
keep it at that.
Yeah. It's a
Dude,
good one.
this hour flew by. Wow, such a fun conversation.
Yeah, that was awesome, man. You
Yeah,
dropped a lot of great gems in here. I gotta get that Notion playbook too now. I'm like, you got too
yeah.
much, got
I'll
some
send
knowledge I
over.
didn't get in college here.
Yeah, I'll send over. I'm actually building a LinkedIn profile playbook, and it's more just like a I'm
Okay.
replicating the LinkedIn profile. I'm going to add content to it.
Hmm.
But I've noticed that with the playbooks that I'm giving away and the few that I'm selling, I need to make videos that attach to it because even myself, I hate just getting a new tool and not knowing how to use it. That's
Oh
been my,
yeah,
my
yeah,
biggest like challenge lately is just to create a good video, which I found this app called Screen Studio, or I may just use Riverside to do it. Who knows? But I'll send
yeah.
you all the playbooks that I have and run with it,
Oh,
build some stuff. Yeah, I've got like
sweet.
three right now that I'm working on.
Yeah, I would love that.
Maybe I
Thank you.
think you'll find it useful and share with your community and whatnot.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Again, Talent Roadmap meets Parsity. This may be a merger and acquisition down the road. So we'll
You
catch
never
you all
know.
later.
Yeah. See ya.
All right. Catch up. Yeah.